So this is actually a copy of the book that we have. That's actually our second book. And this is records from 1832 to November 1832 through October 1852. And in the book, it starts out where it has the Articles of Faith, the Constitution, at the meeting of the Second Baptist Church of Danbury held. Pertinent to notice at the meeting house is said town, November 17th, 1832, the church reserved itself into society by the adoption of the following preamble of Constitution as thereof. And then it goes on, it tells the Constitution what our church believes, and it goes on. But the one thing that I thought was interesting, about 2/3 of the way through, it actually talks about how they would get subscriptions to help pay for the pastor. They did different things. It was kind of like an early faith promise. We want to bring this guy in, and if we do, how are we going to pay for him? So I want you to tell me that you'll guarantee a certain amount of money so we can afford to do this. And in this, it talks about the salary and that they did not have enough to pay him. A lot of times, too, from what I've read in some of these documents, they would pay the pastor several months ahead of time, or maybe even for the whole year. I guess maybe that was their way of keeping him for the whole year, or maybe it was just that's the way they did things. So when I was reading a lot of these documents like this, they would talk about different things, and I really had to go back and try and figure out, because I could read the words, but they didn't really make any sense to me. So they were talking about, one thing, for example, was they were talking about renting a pew. Well, if you're not familiar with this term, what they would do is they would actually have sections of a pew. A lot of the New England churches, they have actually, the older ones actually have like a little boxed in area. The children would be there, the adults, maybe the grandparents, parents, they would rent that specific pew or cubicle, and they would pay for their pew. So you'll see in the financials, they'll say pew rentals. And my thought was pew rentals, they're paying somebody to rent these pews to actually use them in the church. Well, so there's a lot to learn when you're reading not only cursive, which will be a lost language, you also have to put it in its context. So, but here they talk about the minister and how they were going to pay him. So different things like that. And these are basically meetings about what happened, everyday things. I read one where they actually brought up a church discipline kind of situation where the neighbor stole a side of meat out of the neighbor's shed that they kept the meat drying for the winter. Very poor conditions. I'm sure they were desperate. They were brought up before the church. They denied it. The whole thing, it went on for months. And finally, they paid them for it. So obviously, they did it. Another item that we have here is our Bible that was presented to the Baptist Church in Danbury, Connecticut by Mrs. Margaret Allen, and it's in memory of her husband, and it's dated December 1919. So obviously the Bible's seen better days, but it's a beautiful, beautiful Bible. And the carving and different things like that is just incredible, the details. And heavy. That's the family Bible. You never wanted to get in trouble and have to have the family Bible on you. So another item that we have here is one of the books. It's from 1903 to 1924. And I actually read part of this just specifically to find out about the plague. When we had our 2020 COVID outbreak, I thought it was interesting that they were talking about the 1919 outbreak. And so I went through and read to see if there was any documentation about if it had influenced our church. Well, they had several people pass away in 1919. So that was one of the things there. But I also think it's interesting that you can tell that this is an old oil, the ink. You dip it into the little ink well. You can tell the different strokes and different things like that. We actually have one book that is very, very, well, you can see here, is very blotchy because obviously it wasn't consistent in writing. You got your first batch and you got a lot of ink and then it ran out and then he'd do it again. But you can definitely see the old ink, which is very interesting, I find. But it also shows different monies that were brought in for different reasons. Just a really interesting thing, different people. So different items as well. Somebody was a budding scrapbook artist, because you got different things that they put in here, which I thought was interesting. It was all brand new a few years ago. That was all the thing to put the scrapbooks together. But here's one, and this is 1924, a morning service. Goes through the different things. And it also talks about the new memorial window as a gift from Mrs. Skinner in memory of her mother, A.C. Hubbard's wife. And we're going to be talking about that. Dr. Hubbard, we'll be talking about him in a little bit as well. So that's a fascinating read as well. This, I don't know if you guys or anybody that's listening has ever seen one of these, but this was our cornerstone collectible items that we put, well, we didn't, but they did when they put this in the building, 1955 building that we just left. This is how they would do it. They would put it in copper, they would seal it, fabricate it closed, and then the different items were in here. It's just some of the different things that we have here. And I'll show you a couple of them. Let's see. I know there's coins in here, so I don't really want to drop all the coins. But just some different items. They showed the construction of the building. This is a 1963 building, but they're showing different pictures. Very typical to have pictures of the building or former pictures of the building, the construction of it. Also, an old deed, discharge of mortgage in the 1963, just different things like that. A bulletin for the dedication of the building, but then they also put really old things in with it too. And this, I wish I had these stamps because it probably would be worth quite a bit. But this is to whom these presents shall come greeting. The Baptist Church of Danbury is a corporation organized and existing under the virtue of the laws of the state of Connecticut. And then it goes on, and I'm trying to find the date here, 1956. So that's when they purchased the building from the guy who had his mansion there, which was beautiful. I have pictures, but not with me. So different things that were written down about what happened, sermons that were, to whom it may concern, the land for which the building stands was deeded to the Baptist Church. And then it has an old copy, 1948. So, and they always put coins in. Sometimes they'd put a shoe, something weird, but just stuff from that era. All right, I'll pick that up later. Now we go to our newspaper, and this newspaper was dated November 16th, 1963. And this was talking about John F. Kennedy, which I thought was interesting. Soviets release Yale professor cite growing concerns of JFK. They have the information about John F. Kennedy. It's interesting because this is just shy of a week later he was assassinated. So pretty interesting. Now I come to my telephone, and if you're my age or older, you'll know what this is, but I was showing this to one of our younger college-age girls, and she looked like I just grew another eyeball. So this, I'm going to explain, is a telephone. You put your ear here, and your mouth, you talk in there. So when you make a call, you have to put your finger, let's say my phone number is 475. So I have to go to the 4, go all the way, hold it for a second, 4. Then you go all the way around, 7, 5. Now, if you stop halfway through or jerk it back, it's confused. It's not like our modern technology. You have to perfectly do it the same speed, touch that, let it go back, do the next one. When you get upset, the really cool thing, he gets upset with somebody, you want to prove that you're upset with them, you slam down, it hangs it up. You don't have to slide anything, do any of that. But that's the old-time telephone. The old-time telephone you could actually hear. I never had any problem hearing anybody unless they weren't talking into the actual mouthpiece. But, and it was attached by a cord. So the cord went somewhere in your wall, and then it went somewhere underground, and you could always make a phone call, even most of the time in bad weather, storms, because the cables were underground, or the wires, whatever. So that's one of the old phones I thought was interesting. We have about 5 of them around here. I'm not sure why, but apparently we needed a lot of phones. This is a financial book, and we had a radio station here until the late 80s, and with WLAD. And this is their breakdown of what they spent money for, different things like that. So they liked Radio Shack, apparently, because most of it's Radio Shack, which, do they even have Radio Shacks now? I don't think so. But anyway, they bought a lot of different things to help keep the radio station going, and for years, it did. It was on every Sunday for many, many years. So here's our letter to Thomas Jefferson. In 1790, our church was started. George Washington was president. Now for me, 235 years is hard to really fathom. So when you hear that George Washington was president in 1790, to me that really helps me date how long 235 years is. So George Washington now is no longer president, Thomas Jefferson is, and a group of churches, Danbury Baptist, the association got together and they talked about different things in the community, different things, problems, things that were going on. They were concerned at the time that Thomas Jefferson, they really weren't sure how he felt about taxing the churches. Now, when Thomas Jefferson got in, they wanted to find out exactly what had happened, or how would he tax them, like the reason we came to America, to get away from the taxation. So they wrote him a letter. They all agreed to write a letter. So we wrote the letter to Thomas Jefferson and basically asked him, how do you feel about this? And this was in 1801, 1802, the end of the year 1801, beginning of the year, January 1802, he writes back and he says, I have no issues with taxing a church, and he goes through and he talks about this building a wall of separation between the church and the state. He's prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So he doesn't want the government to be involved in the church. A lot of times we get that backwards. We think it's the church being involved in the government. It's actually the government getting involved, and that's why this letter was written. We didn't want him to get involved in the church. Then we have one of the coolest things I found when I was cleaning out the church at the old building, way up in the attic. Here was this kite, but then, or airplane. When you look at it, it says July 1st, 1962. It's actually a bulletin. So, you know, even though we say these kids these days are terrible, guess what? They were horsing around in 1962. That was before me, though. So, anyway, now we go on to a couple newspaper articles that I thought were kind of interesting. This one, July 19, 1899. And then this one is the Danbury News, and the date August 24th, 1881. Here it talks about P.T. Barnum's gift, the greatest showman dips into the past, different things. I'm not really sure why it was kept, but it's pretty interesting that they have a really, really old newspaper here. So that's cool. Yes. So our plate here is actually a very interesting plate. And I know we'll get a better picture of this, but it says that it was erected by the king's daughter in memory of Andrew Hubbard. He was pastor of the church here, the Danbury Baptist Church of Danbury. He was pastor from 1868 to 1903. And he is an interesting guy because he was pastor for 35 years, and when he went to resign, the church said, no, we don't want you to quit. We'll put you as emeritus, pastor emeritus. So he was that way until his death in 1903. So here's a picture of him. After he had passed away, the church had asked for a portrait or a picture of him, and Mrs. Hubbard had given him a picture. And so he doesn't look like a very friendly guy, but pretty interesting. Dr. Hubbard, on the back of this card, or the picture, it says different people that he had married, and a couple of them were Halls. And if you go to Worcester Cemetery, you're going to see a lot of the Halls there. But Dr. Hubbard he was pastor from November 1868 and served for 35 years, after which he was pastor emeritus. The interesting thing about Pastor Hubbard, or Dr. Hubbard, was that he was one of 6 men that actually spoke at Abraham Lincoln's funeral after he was assassinated. He was a pastor of the Second Baptist Church in Springfield, Illinois, Lincoln's hometown. And so they wanted to get a local pastor to come and preach, and so he was 26 years at the time, 26 years of age. And he did the second inaugurational speech that Lincoln had said, and they said that when he was standing in front of the mausoleum, it sounded as though Abraham Lincoln was speaking. The people there said it was very ominous. But he was pastor there, and then he was pastor in Ohio for a couple years. And then he came to our church in 1868. And he was pastor until, obviously, he passed away. But I thought it was interesting, one of 6 men that spoke at Abraham Lincoln's funeral. So our picture here is a very old picture. I haven't specifically dated it, but I do know that the older pictures in the back of the picture, they used to put a newspaper to protect, I think, the picture itself, also to make it thicker so the board in the back wouldn't scratch the picture. It would hold it in place. This picture was hung in our 1955 building, I assume since the day they moved in. And you notice the dark line? It was actually hanging in front of, before, back in the day, they used to put the wiring, the conduits in an actual pipe, metal pipe, and this was hanging in front of that. And that's what that is. I assume it was warm and started cooking part of the picture after many, many, many years. But the picture is of the harvest, thanking God for the harvest. And in the back of the picture, I said about the newspaper, there's a newspaper back there, but because it's starting to fall apart, I really didn't want to take it apart and figure out what the date of the picture was. Just an interesting thing, I thought. So it's a very old picture and just a neat find. This actually right here it says right here, the pastor Gilbert's son wrote this. Now his name was Dayton Gilbert, and this was a good turn report. So basically, if he did these good things, that was a good report. So on Wednesday, he emptied the ashes and dried the silver. Thursday, he emptied the ashes, and Friday, he brought up coal. Saturday, he laid the rug into Dorothy's room and took a basket to church for Miss Benedict. He helped mow the lawn, and then it goes on, the different things that he did. So those were his good turns for the week. These were his jobs. He was to be helpful to Mother with some of her housework. He went to the store. He went to the store for his father. It sounds like he was a good son. So interesting to have documentation, emptying the ashes and drying the silver. How many of us have dried silver? I haven't. So now we have a picture. We have several pictures, but this one, they were missionaries to Burma, which is interesting. You've got, if you notice the little outfit, the little boy, very beautiful chairs. I'm always fascinated with the pictures and the chairs in the background. They had the fanciest chairs. So this is a lady who was a missionary to China, and she, the photography was actually done here done in Danbury, Connecticut. A couple of our pictures here. This one's a little easier to see. This is Reverend Stone. Now, Reverend Stone was the pastor during the Civil War, 1860 to 1868. He was right before the pastor that I spoke about that spoke at Abraham Lincoln's funeral. So during the time of Abraham Lincoln being shot, this would have been the pastor of the time. And this is a better picture of him here. And notice the beautiful chairs in the background as well. The interesting thing we were talking about too, the old pictures, they always look so sad because none of them are smiling. So I find that interesting. That's the first thing we do is we show our teeth when we get our pictures taken. But back then, nobody smiled. They just kind of stared into nothingness. The last picture I wanted to show you is from 1733, and it's the Poor Richard's First Almanac. And here it says that Poor Richard is 1733, an almanac for the year of Christ, 1733 being the first after leap year. So we Googled this, and yes, 1732 was a leap year. And the interesting thing with writing, even typing or print, is that when you're reading these documents, if you see, and it's very difficult to see, I understand, but here the year of Christ, the S looks like an F. So you're looking at it and you're going, Christ, that doesn't make any sense. But that's how they made their S's to look like our fancy F's. So it's kind of decoding old documents, decoding what they used to do. The S's were always very squiggly and lower all the way down past the line, which we never do. As a school teacher, we know we never put that S below in the basement, and they did all the time here. So that's something that when you're looking at an old document and you see a fancy looks like an F, it's probably an S, just to let you know.
We really don't need one on the first one anyway. So.
Okay. all the other takes, right? So our picture here is interesting because, again, with the shavings of the newspaper or sections of the newspaper in the back, but this one, they had boards that were put, very thin boards, that were put in the back, and nails were put in it and pushed down to keep those boards secure. But on this board, on the back of this board, it says patent pending 1880. Conservative. Now we do the brighter, shiny or whatever, but beautiful picture frame.